Hey guys, it's Kate, and I hope you're having a great day. A little while back, I made an art journal page with acrylic paint and mixed media, and it was this basket of flowers. And so I wanted to try to do that today. So I'm going to work really wet today, put down a base coat, and actually, what I might even do is just spray it. So I'm going to get very wet today on my paper. And so I'm giving this a good coat. Going to move that water around and just make sure we're good and moist. And I've got a little bit of buckling because I didn't spray the back, but I am fine with that right now. It's actually going to help my paint flow a little bit. So I'm going to go for a lighter colored background. So I'm mixing some yellow ochre. And I'm also going to put some sky blue in it, but first I'm going to go for the yellow. And letting it just kind of come in here and mark some random areas with my brush. Just like this. And then coming into the sky blue. And it's going to turn green in some spots, which is fine with me. I want this to have a light dry, so I'm keeping it as a pretty light wash here on the page. So we will stop here, and I've got a nice little coating. So I'm going to let this dry and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back and we're dry, and it dried nice and flat. So I have this nice background going on here, and I switched my paper to portrait mode. And because watercolor is a little bit different than acrylic, obviously you can layer acrylic and it's pretty opaque if you want it to be, but watercolor being transparent, you got to plan a little bit. So I'm going to kind of do a light outline of where I want my basket to be. And it's going to maybe be a little bit too light for you to see on camera. So actually I might darken my pencil more than I would normally. And you might see pencil in the finished result, but this way you'll be able to see where my sketch is. So you can see kind of a basic basket, and because the basket is going to be brown and my plants are going to be green and I'm going to have some red flowers, I just want to make sure that where I'm going to have my basket kind of stays put, so I can put my greenery and my flowers and everything over that, and then I'm going to go back in last and paint the dark values of the basket where there's no green and other colors. So I've got my basic sketch here. It just took me, a minute, but it gives me where I want my main shapes. And so I'm going to go in first. I'm going to grab my round brush. This is a Princeton Summit number 10. I'm kind of playing around with these because they're new to me brushes. And I'm going to spray my palette just to moisten it up. And I'm going to start with a lighter green. So I'm going to go into a tree green here. And I'm even going to add maybe a little bit of yellow ochre to it. And I'm going to water it down quite a bit, because this is going to be my first coat and pretty light. And that looks pretty good to me. So I'm just going to add a little bit more water just so I get a good flow going. And I'm going to start to scumble a bit some of the areas. And I'm just going to roll my brush, getting it very loose, dropping in color. Now, this is a first coat. There's going to be more colors going on, so I don't need to fill every single thing in, but I want to make sure that I have everything going where I want it to. So I had kind of sketched out a couple of small lines where my greenery is going to go. And so I'm just kind of filling that in. And I'm just going kind of willy-nilly with my brush here. I want to get that baseline texture in, some of these marks for some leaves. And then let me mix up some more color. Like that. Add some more of that yellow ochre. And some more water. And I'm going to use this as kind of a base too for the rest of my colors. And I'm going to come back up into here and fill out this area too. And you can see I'm just putting my color in. And I might even come in with some splashes, just like this. Because we're going to be nice and loose and just have some fun here. All right, now I'm going to add in a bit of a darker green, and I might do first some olive green, and that's going to darken it up a bit. And I can start dotting in some of that in some kind of strategic areas. So if my sun is coming from this direction, I could potentially have a lot of extra shadow on this side of my basket. So I would want to make sure to put a lot more of that dark green on this side. And this is going to be a very loose and abstracted painting. And I might have a little bit more coming over here. I think this is looking pretty good so far. Okay. Now, while this is wet, I'm going to come in with some plain water where I want some of my main flowers. And I'm going to dot in that water. And actually, what I might even do is come in with a little bit of a splash first. And then start marking out where I want some of those larger flowers. And don't forget your lower levels. And I'm just blotting at that a bit with my brush. And as that water sits, it's going to start lifting some color. And I'm going to come in gently with the Q-tip here and start blotting back some of this color. And that'll give me a little bit of a nicer base for where I plan to put my flowers. And I'm just blotting back the flower areas. This one's kind of dry, so I'm just going to grab another Q-tip and I'm just getting that extra moisture off. And it leaves behind something closer to the paper surface. And that way that'll be a good base to put my flowers. And this is really easy and loose. You don't have to worry about anything. So I'm going to add a little bit of a cool green here. And I'm going to go into my Hooker's green, which is going to really cool that down, make it kind of a rich. And I'm going to be a little bit more sparing with this one. And I'm also going to try to avoid some of those areas where I had planned on putting my flowers. This is going to be like kind of a shadowy color. And then I'm just going to kind of go around here and get that in there. And you have just some nice interest, you have your variation in color, and it all has kind of a chance to sort of dry in between layers too. All right. And last but not least, I'm going to add some of this Payne's Gray. So we get some deep tones here. And I'm going to drop this in even more sparingly. But you can see all these colors together, kind of working together, where we can have just some nice tones of green in this basket. And it's very loose, kind of abstracted style. But I really enjoyed making this with the acrylic in the art journal. So I'm glad to do this again with just some regular watercolor. Okay, so I'm going to keep this. So when you have green, the complementary color to that is red. And if you add red to green, you will get brown. You can also use it to kind of tone down color also. So I'm going into my madder red and getting a pretty decent brush load. And you can see we have this really sort of chocolatey brown, slightly like a brick red color, and I really love that. So I'm going to come in and start working on my basket up here. And I'm just going to come in and we're going to kind of put in some marks for our rope. We're going to have that come right off the page. And then I'm going to start gently putting some marks in here. And it's going to be loose. And I'm just putting in some lines to kind of hint that basket. But we're going to also leave room to add some other colors. I might add some yellow ochre and stuff like that to just bring in some different colors to our basket. And if we have a little bit of color bleed, that's okay with me. We're doing a loose style painting, so that is just fine. So now we have our basket. And I'm just going to kind of come in here a bit and let that kind of settle where it is. Now back to our plant. I think we are ready to add some red for our flowers. So I'm going to go back into that madder red and put some of that in my mixing well or tray. And I'm going to come in here and start adding in some of this red to where I left some of the spots and also some other areas. And I'm just going to kind of dot it in, and there's going to be some spots here where it's going to be a little bit dry and some spots where it's going to be kind of red or kind of damp. And so you're going to get kind of a nice little mixture of places where the red kind of bleeds out and where it keeps that hard edge, like right here where I blended it. Now, if you wanted to get a softer edge where you added it, you can always drag with some water. That's totally fine. But otherwise, just have some fun with your color application. And some of these might be kind of in the background. Some of these might be in the foreground. They might be in the shadows. So while we have some areas where we have some really nice red and it's strong, you also have some spots where it mixes a bit with the green and it almost puts it into the shadows, into the background. So I really like the look of this. Now this is kind of like a bare green area, so I'm going to add some red there. And what I'm also going to do is just add a nice splash of red to this, just for some extra texture on my paper overall, like that. Now what I'm going to do next is dip into my yellow ochre, and that's going to lighten up this darkness quite a bit. Yellow ochre I really like because of all of the watercolors. It might be one of the most opaque ones on any palette I've tried, and it really does a good job just making these beautiful earthy colors. It might be one of my favorites. So I'm going to start going over some of the little spots on this basket and kind of going in and filling out some of these other areas where we have that red, and I want it to be very textured, sort of two-tone, and eliminate some more of that white, because this basket I want to be pretty solid against those leaves. But I still want it to have plenty of texture. So I'm just kind of filling in some of these gaps and letting that lighter color kind of fill in, but solidify this flower basket underneath. And I like what that's doing there. Just like that. Now, straight from the pan, and I'm just basically rolling this around on my brush, I'm going into that yellow ochre directly. And you can see on my paper, it's doing a pretty darn good job of some coverage here. And I'm also going to add this to my little rope that's coming in from the top, like that. And I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to let this dry again and come back and we'll put on some finishing touches. Okay, I'm going to go into my Payne's Gray a little bit here and maybe mix a little bit of that brown in with it to make it kind of a slightly warmer gray and bring in some of those colors from the basket. And I'm going to come in here and add some shadow areas down underneath where the leaves are. And that way you have some more depth of color here. And what I'm going to do is drag this out a little bit. So I moistened my brush and blotted it very well. And then I kind of drag to soften up the edge. And I'm going to do this along where these greenery pieces kind of go over the basket. And that way you can kind of see even more of a shadow where they're kind of falling against the basket. And that gives it a little bit more depth, so it's not quite so one tone. And I'm going to really make it pretty deep in a couple of spots. You mix up a little bit more color here, and I might even drop a little bit more in these areas up top underneath and just let that really come down through. Same thing here, I'm just going to drag that down a little bit, like so. And I'm going to, I think, make that come down even a little bit further here, since this side would kind of be away from the sun. I don't want to lose all of my basket texture though, so I'm kind of going easy with the color. Maybe I'll add in a little bit more of that darker brown here and right here. So it would kind of be all of the shadows that the sun wouldn't hit that side of the basket because these plants are in the way. Just like that. And I'm going to go back into with just my brush tip and add in some little shadow lines on the side of that rope to give it a little bit more texture, just like that. Nice. Now, I think we might be ready for some little dots in the centers of some of these imaginary flowers. So I'm just going to add a few here randomly for interest, but this is all just imagination. So no knowing where each of these flower centers are. And some of them I might make a little bit bigger so that we don't just have a dot placed in some different areas. We can differentiate those a bit and make them a little bit more interesting. Just like that. And it doesn't have to be all of them, just where you have hint. And then I'm going to go into my white. Now, white watercolor is really not opaque, but sometimes you can get a little bit of opacity with it if you make it a pretty thick mix. So I've got quite a bit on my brush here, and I'm going to make a few white splashes on my paper just like that. And I'm going to let that kind of dry on there. And let's say we do a little bit of gold too. Why not, right? Brighten this up with some gold. So this is the Royal Gold from the palette. I'm just activating it a bit to the side. And we'll put on some splashes of gold as well. And I'll even put some down here toward the bottom and into our flower basket. All right, time for a close-up. So we can see our rope, our loose flowers with our basket, our gold sparkles from our gold splashes. And I really love how this turned out. It's very loose and abstracted, but I mean, obviously you can tell exactly what it is. So I hope you followed along with me in this video. And if you liked it, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, keep creating.